I'm excited that you've joined us today as we launch the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation second Digital Dialogue series. Today's session is titled Global Perspectives on the Historical Legacies of Racism and Colonialism in Science and Scholarship. The Digital Dialogue series was conceived of in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. As an organization, we at American Friends are passionate that transatlantic research and scholarship are mechanisms for advancement, cooperation, and connectivity, and that these connections must transcend language, cultural, racial, and historical distinctions. Furthermore, those of us who are Humboldtians for life are enthusiastic ambassadors for AVH, who ardently contend that our Humboldt experience has transformed us personally and professionally. Given this, we're troubled that the US Humboldt community does not reflect the rich diversity of our country as a whole, and we want this to change. This digital dialogue is one element of our commitment to take action as we seek to confront prejudice and racism and highlight the scholarly and professional excellence reflected in diverse voices and perspectives. These sessions for the second series will certainly inform us as we recruit future Humboldtians and will also serve to inform wider audiences of the opportunities, benefits, and realities of international collaboration. And with that, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Simo and Beeman as our guest speakers today. I'm thankful that they're willing to share their knowledge and expertise with us. Since their bios have already been provided in writing, I will give only the briefest of introductions so that we can maximize time for discussion after each has presented their introductory remarks. Dr. Beeman is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She earned her PhD in sociology in 2010 from Northwestern University. Her research is ethnographic in nature and focuses on race, ethnicity, racism, international migration, and state violence in both France and the United States. She is author of Citizen Outsider, Children of North African Immigrants in France, and she's a co-PI for a Mellon Foundation Sawyer Seminar Grant and will be a visiting fellow at Stanford Center for the Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences beginning this year in 2002. Dr. Simo has served as head of the Department of Modern Languages, Literatures, and Civilizations of the University of Yaoundé, Cameroon since 1992. He is also director of the Center for Scientific Cooperation between Africa and Germany. His research interests include the legacy of imperialism and colonialism in sub-Saharan Africa. Professor Simo received the German First Class Officer Order of Merit Cross from the government of Germany for his steadfast commitment to the Germano-African relations in 2014 and the AVH Reimar Lust Award for International Scholarly and Cultural Exchange in 2008. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask Dr. Simo to begin his introductory remarks to be immediately followed by Dr. Beeman's. So Dr. Simo. Let's see. I'm not sure what, are you there?
Hello, are you having me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate in this exchange, which is originally meant for American scholars and young scholars. I'm happy because it's a very interesting opportunity for me even to hear about what are your preoccupations regarding cooperation, and to tell you a little bit about my own experience on that field. That means being scholar from Cameroon in Germany, what experiences I had, and what conclusion I can have from all these experiences. I can, from the beginning, tell you that I'm really very happy to be a Humboldtian, and that it's helped me too much for personally to grow in my career and to improve in my research efficiency. What I would like you to have in mind is that English is just my third foreign language, the first one being French and German. And because of that, my expression might not be at the level where I would like it to be, but I will try my best to react to your questions, and especially to exchange with you what have been my experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for including me in this program. Thank you to the American Friends of AVH for extending this invitation. So I thought I would just say a few words about my my own background, and both sort of scholarly and personal, and my own research, and maybe a few words about my role as a professor as it relates to these questions. And then I look forward to the dialogue that we'll have and to your questions. So first, let me just say that I intervene here as a non-European, as a US citizen, and also as a Black scholar and a sociologist who's conducted ethnographic research on race, racism, and migration in France for now over a decade. So, so I come to these topics, you know, in our dialogue from multiple vantage points. You know, being a first-generation college student, being an African-American woman, being a tenured professor in the United States higher education. And so I'm going to just sort of, you know, everything I say will be kind of colored by those intersections of the multiple facets of my identity. So as was mentioned in the introduction, my first book, Citizen Outsider, Children of North African Immigrants in France, was an adaptation of my doctoral dissertation on children of North African immigrants living in France. And so many years ago, I'm just going to start with a sort of anecdote about doing this research that hopefully will sort of clarify where I'm coming from. So many years ago, when I was a graduate student at Northwestern, and I was working on my dissertation proposal for, you know, what was then to become this project on children of immigrants from former French colonies in the Maghreb, and, you know, questions of cultural citizenship, inclusion, exclusion, and racial and ethnic identity, I remember meeting with a prominent French social scientist who was visiting Northwestern University at the time. He told me definitively that race does not mean anything in France, especially compared to the United States, and that terms such as, you know, white or Black, you know, don't have any import, would not mean anything in French society. And so, you know, it was sort of a dismissive response to what I was really interested in studying as a graduate student. Yet when I moved to France, to Paris specifically, and began my ethnographic research, began actually talking to people and conducting interviews, I found quite the opposite. So race, even though not officially measured or acknowledged by the French state because of its Republican ideology, and instead just still marks individuals as distinct, and creates reinforces a racial order or hierarchy. So this anecdote I find really useful, and I share with grad students because I think, you know, one, it talks about how people can kind of dismiss your work before you got it, really. But also it reveals what humanities scholar David Theo Goldberg has referred to as the political racelessness of Europe, or the ways that race and racism is often framed as outside of Europe and never within it or constitutive of it, right? So, you know, other regions or societies of the world can be racist, such as the United States, but France and, you know, I think, and Europe more generally cannot be. And this is an insight that both has shaped my own experience doing this work, again, as a Black American scholar, and also really been informative in the findings of my own work. So essentially what I ended up finding was that the Maghreban second generation, or the North African second generation, because of France's, colonial empire and its desire to actively suppress and ignore that history, serves as a visible reminder for France's brutal colonial rule, and also serves the reminder that France has never been and currently isn't a predominantly white society. So oftentimes, and I'm just gonna stop. So just tell me if I'm speaking too long. So I just realized I did it. I meant to start a timer and I did it. So just give me a wave if I'm going on for too long. So just a few more words kind of about my research, and then a bit about my positionality and higher education as it relates to these topics. Okay, so oftentimes when we have these conversations of sort of diversity or multiculturalism in France, and again, I want to say in the rest of Europe, especially Western Europe as well, it's often framed using a migration lens, or in other words, it's often framed using a language or a discourse of sort of newness of diversity or multiculturalism, rather than through, historically accurate and thorough understanding of how the construction of Europe relied on colonial domination and related migration related to that colonial domination to the metropole. So in other words, we can't sort of ignore the role of whiteness and white supremacy in France and Europe more broadly. Throughout my many years of interviews of fieldwork, my interlocutors have conveyed how they feel they are racialized and the implications of this racialization, and also how they've come to understand the ways that being white is seen as default in French society, such that people who are not white feel more like they don't have a place in French society. So especially in terms of sort of, who a French person is, who can represent France, who can be understood as a French person by others. And this is another way of saying, which I, again, is something I focus on in my research, about how non-white individuals in Europe are always seen and framed as quintessential outsiders to Europe, and the sort of implications for what that means for ethno-racial minorities across the continent. And again, like my work is primarily on France, but I think a lot of the findings, can be extrapolated throughout the continent. I also just want to quickly. So another way of saying this also is to think about the ways that white supremacy is global. And as humanities scholar Fatima El-Tayeb has noted, quote, she says that, I think this is really smart, so I'm going to quote it directly: "Without Europe, there would be no race, and without race and racism, there would be no Europe," end quote. Yeah. So in other words, we can think about this from a scholarly perspective of, how Europeanness, as if that's a word, is constructed as white, and therefore, non-whites are seen as non-European, right? And then, sort of whiteness, or sort of language of white supremacy, has historically become and remains Europe's racial grammar, as Europe continues to imagine itself as homogenous and colorblind, again, particularly relative to other regions of the world, such as the United States. And then I think I also just want to quickly say, and then I'll move on to the higher education piece, is to also highlight the work of many scholars of Black Europe, both scholars who are European themselves and scholars around the world, who really, encouraged us to take seriously the very long history and presence of Black people across the continent, again, partly because of France's and, well, the rest of Europe's colonial domination of many other regions of the world. So, there's this, so Stephen Small, to give one example, is a scholar at UC Berkeley who has used the phrase, or has sort of articulated the phrase, "we are here because you were there." So in other words, we cannot understand the conditions of Black people across Europe without reckoning with Europe's, presence, outside of Europe, essentially, or Europe's history of colonial and imperial rule. And so let me stop there real quickly, just to say a couple words about kind of my own positionality in higher education, just for a couple minutes. So again, as I said, I'm also speaking as a tenured Black professor, and really someone who's very passionate about and tries to really engage with questions of racial and ethnic equity in higher education, institutions of higher education. And so in that sense, I want to just highlight what sociologist Patricia Hill Collins has argued, against this notion of a quote unquote imperfect desegregation, or sort of inserting racial and ethnic minorities in predominantly white institutions without a meaningful structural or institutional change. So we should kind of move beyond questions simply of sort of diversity and representation to really thinking through, or hopefully thinking through questions of justice and equity for populations long excluded in higher education, both as students, staff, and faculty. And then I think that will sort of allow us to have a more sort of radical rethinking of questions of racial and ethnic inclusion in our institutions of higher education. So I have a lot more to say, but I may stop now and go to the questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jean. That was excellent. So I think we're going to go ahead and open the floor to any questions that people have. As Alonka said, you can go ahead and type it in, and I can either call on you and let you read out your question, or you can just raise your hand and go ahead and ask your question, but just maybe do it in a slower and more deliberate manner, just for those who are not native speakers. So, maybe just to follow up on what you said, I mean, what opportunities do you really feel, given that, racism exists on both sides of the Atlantic, right? What in your field then is the value of this transatlantic kind of experience and work that you've done? Like, what's the unique aspect of it that helps move scholarship along?
Is that a question for both of us? Or,
yeah, for both of you can reflect on that.
Okay. Well, Dr. Seema, do you want to start with that, or do you want me to start?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot about, what the value of comparison in general, right? And like what we can learn from comparing different societies, which I think broadly are, focused on questions or considering questions of, organization of plural societies. So I teach this a lot in my undergraduate courses on race and racism here on my campus, of saying that, different societies, both historically and, presently, are really thinking through how's the best way to sort of organize, for lack of a better word, plural or diverse society. And I think, thinking about the comparison of, France, which thinks about it in one way, which is to basically say that, all individuals are equal as French, and there isn't any meaningful distinction, and there isn't any sort of, there is a data collection based on race, and race is not a legitimate category, versus, the United States on the other end of the spectrum, which, obviously does have racial and ethnic categories and does measure them. And I think, it's really helpful to sort of tease apart with students, or at least I found it really helpful to tease apart with students, what are the sort of advantages and disadvantages of each approach? Not saying that one society is better than the other, but rather thinking about how they're all kind of grappling with very similar questions, informed by, somewhat unique and also similar histories. And then thinking through that comparison allows us to think about, how we can imagine or make changes in, our society or other societies. So I like to think about sort of, I think there's a lot of value in thinking about what's similar and what's different, and what we can learn from these similarities and differences.
Dr. Seema, did you just mute yourself on accident? Because you were unmuted just a moment ago.
Pardon? Can I speak now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I might have some technical problem, to solve in order to really get you, because there are moments where I'm interrupted. Anyway, please let I just say a few words about the question of racism.
Okay.
Some years ago, a Cameroonian migrated to the USA, and he wrote a novel which is very interesting. The title of the novel is How I Became a Black Man. That means that, in fact, the experience of being Black is not something you experience from Africa. You know, you have to leave Africa to experience it. And the young man getting in society, that US society, where there's a color line, and where Black people are in a minority, and therefore treated as such, as marginal subjects of the country. Of course, that's what that young man became to experience, a fact that he's not just a human being, but that he's categorized according to his to the color of his skin, something which he hasn't experienced before, because he was just a man here in Cameroon, and maybe the gender might play a role in the categorization. Maybe also the region he comes from in Cameroon might play a role. But being a Black man, it was his first time to experience it once in the USA. I can say that in Europe, you personally, you don't experience in the academic milieu that questions of being Black or not. And I can even tell the young Americans that they will experience something totally different, that they are Americans. And that as Americans, they have a position in global wars, you know, a geopolitical position, which above mine as Cameroonian, and they are treated as American. That means once in Europe, they will experience that they are Americans, not Blacks or something like that, but Americans, first of all. It's only on the street and with some people they might encounter in the private life that they will feel that there is also a color line, of course, in Europe. But in the academic field, they will feel something totally different. And that means that they will feel rather that they are coming from another academic milieu with other traditions, with other, let's say, preponderant theoretical, epistemological orientations. You know, they will be confronted in Europe with traditions which are very strong there, academic traditions. That means, in fact, that they will be, and that's what I was confronted to. There's an asymmetry. But the asymmetry comes from the fact that being a foreigner, you don't have the same background in mastery, some theoretical background that, let's say, Germans do, or let's say French do. But anyway, you will feel as American that you are coming from a country which is powerful, very powerful in the field of science, so that I don't think that somebody will look at you from above, you know. They will be rather curious about what you can bring to them, because anyway, in Germany especially, America is still considered a very great country of science. So they are willing to learn from their children. And you might experience the fact that they are expecting you to bring them new insights, and especially bring them new theoretical approaches to things which are dominant, and because they are eager to copy it most of the time. I'm speaking of Germany, not of France. There you have a nationalist reflex, especially in the academic field, where you experience something totally different. I, on my part, I'm rather in that case in the situation of coming from, let's say, a not so powerful country, not even known country, and therefore people not expecting much. In fact, for me, not much new. They think rather than I'm coming to learn. And that is a position which is very discerned for us, especially from Africa, that people don't think that we are coming as a colleague to exchange, maybe to teach them some new aspects of the subject we are dealing with, but that they consider that we are special, that we are specially people to be taught. This is a situation which reflects, of course, the functioning of the world, which you have clearly an asymmetry. You have country where knowledge is produced and country where knowledge is supposed to be disseminated. This is the experience, and that's what I would tell young people from America, that they will experience that they are rather coming, that they are not in the same situation like I, because geopolitically they are coming from a powerful background, which might rather bring people to be eager to learn, or to exchange profitably for them on that field. These are experiences I've done, and I've worked that out in some articles which appeared in French and in German, not in English. I can give you just some titles so that you see the preoccupation I have and the experience and I had with all these situations. The first is Germanistic and postcoloniality. That means Germanistic and a postcolonial situation, and I tried just to explain how it's important for us not just to reproduce the academia, the German academia on themselves, but to see it as from far, and to see it as something which is even curious to be examined, to be examined, and to be interrogated, and where you feel in reading and experiencing that in fact there is a construction of the order, and you are that order which is constructed there, and you had to interrogate how they constructed it. Of course, these are experiences, academic, scientific experiences I had, and which brought me, in fact, to produce articles like Interkulturalität und Wissensproduktion, interculturality and knowledge production, to publish an article on the topic, the heuristic advantage of marginality, coming from the margin into the scientific field, like European one, how you might have an advantage to ask questions people don't ask usually, and maybe to open up that field to new knowledge they are not even aware that it might be of any interest. That's what I would like just to mention that to say that there's a reproduction of the imperial world, and this reproduction of this imperial world on the field of scientific production brings you to be just at the margin of that field, and to have difficulty in being even listened to, but being all the time considered somebody who have to learn. But it is changing. It's changing. You know, after 40 years I've been working there, I see that my positions, my attempts, you know, to broaden interest and to bring people into considering new experiences, new ways of seeing themselves. You know, means as European to seeing themselves, because it's my job, not so much to look at Africa, but to you look at Europe. And it is something which is totally new. We have to reinvent it, because until there, Europeans speak of themselves, you know, and they are sure that speaking of themselves, they're speaking of the humanity, they're speaking of the world, and speaking on others, constructing others, you know, trying to come now and show how they are working on all these topics, you know, how they construct themselves and how they construct the other, has been the whole work I can consider to be my achievement in the years I've been traveling between Africa and Europe, teaching there, researching there, discussing with the colleagues.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can I jump in on that real quickly? Yeah, I really appreciate that. I just wanted to quickly add also that I do agree that it's important to keep in mind kind of the you know, our national background and citizenship. And that was also the case for me, like, and actually one of the things that got me interested in doing scholarship and research on race and racism in France was, you know, through learning the language. And then I did a study abroad program as an undergrad and lived in Paris and with a white host family. And I had a lot of really interesting experiences being racialized, some of which were similar and some of which were different to how I'm racialized here in the United States. But I think as Dr. Simo pointed to, oftentimes when people would hear me, you know, speak French with an obvious non-native accent, then I was interpolated as a US citizen or as a tourist, and then I wasn't subject to the same kinds of racialization, you know, as are Black French people. So I think there is always this you know, important intersection between one sort of, you know, racial identity and also one sort of citizenship or national identity.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know I'm not speaking, but I just want to say that one extra, you know, experience I had was, you know, as an American in a scholarly context, being told not to be arrogant enough to think I could tell them what to do, right? And, you know, that was definitely one of my experiences as well, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you can't, you know, so I don't know how much of that was the racialization of it, but anyway, but I think you're right, Dr. Simo, about that. Okay, so Anne, did you want to go ahead and ask your question verbally? Let's see. So, you know, I think Anne.
Yeah, sorry, it's hard to toggle between all the different components of Zoom quickly because I was in the middle of typing my second question. I go by Andrew, and I am also really excited about the experience I had as a Humboldtian. I'm American, but now work in Canada. I actually think the second question, which I was just in the middle of typing, is a little bit more important in a way, which is about, I'd love for the panelists to address issues of decolonization in pedagogy, i.e. how to teach with awareness around pursuing decolonization in our kind of collective mentality. Because that's been a really hot topic where I'm teaching now, and I think it's quite pertinent. It's something that I try to address in my own classes. So I was hoping to talk about that topic. The other question was just about, probably because I primarily am doing the investigation in English language, but I often find lots of resources from Britain around that seem to acknowledge a kind of idea of racialization that is more similar to what we experience in the US. And so that just leads me to think about do we have a sense of some of the differences across different European cultures around this question of racialization? And if there's what we kind of can pull from that in terms of further understanding. So those were the two questions.
Okay, so there are two.
Well,
go ahead, David.
If you ask me if there is any difference from country to country, what racial discrimination is concerned, I will tell you that in fact there's not so much. Well, if my experience in France, and in Germany, because these are two countries where I have worked and where I've lived. I would say that the differences in handling people or in behaving with people, you know, as I told you, of course, in the society, you have racism. It's a very clear issue. I was just telling that in the academic milieu, that there are other criteria. The asymmetry I experienced there are not, I would not consider it to be expression of racism. As I told you, it's rather the expression of the consciousness of being in another, let's say, at the center. You know, why other people coming to you are from the periphery. This another experience, you know, of another sort of asymmetry you will live. Of course, why I say that is not exactly racism. It's rather, in fact, this result of empire building and the marginalization of some part of the world, you know, and consequently of the people from that part of the world, considering oneself as center, you know, where people come to learn. And I just told you that if I'm a Black man, I say it, and I hope, because I know that in America you have some problem with designation, because I've experienced it in Europe too, you know. We don't have problem with words. We have problem with, let's say, with conditions, you know, with active behavior, you know, not with words, because some people say I shouldn't use the word Negro or something like that. I say I know in America it's not considered to be good. We don't have any problem with that, because if you say you don't want to hear that word anymore, it doesn't mean that it doesn't play something in your consciousness or in your subconsciousness, you know. So I prefer to use it because it's the way. It's the way people don't want. It's worse. People don't want to use them anymore. But there was people used to use, and we has impregnate the consciousness, or the subconsciousness. So I prefer to use it so that we address the right question. What I say is that my experience on that field is that as a Black man coming from America and to Europe, you don't have the same experience as I, as a Black man coming from Africa. And that's why I say it's not the colon line, which is here. So I mean, in the academic field, I must say very clearly, in the academic field, because the people coming from other marginalized places, even if they are white, we've been treated almost in the whole structure of the functioning of the academia, the same way I'm treated as a black man, and where I suppose at least an hypothesis that a Black American won't have, because he's coming from another background, which is rather considered to be the center of the center. That's what I want to say. So racism, you will have it on the streets in Europe, in almost everywhere. But once in the university, it's not racism which you will really experience, but you will experience marginalization, being foreign, and especially from geopolitically minor country. That's what I would say. Racism is inscribed in the scientific productions, in the cultural productions, in literature, in the way to speak, and so on. And we have to address that, and we have to show how it functions, because I know many people who in fact had racist reflex, but who can show you and affirm that they have overwhelmed all these racist reflex.
Okay, Jean, did you want to comment very quickly on?
Yeah, just really briefly. I know we're getting close to time. So yeah, I would just say, I mean, I think to the questions, which I think are really helpful. Couple things. I think I would just emphasize the fact that, I guess I would slightly disagree. I think racism is present, throughout Europe and in higher education institutions throughout Europe. I would also argue that, part of the sort of differences is thinking about the different ways that race is legitimate or not as a category in different places in Europe. So for example, I think this maybe gets to the question, the UK actually does measure race. And so I think, that provides a particular kind of framework for making sense of racism and, anti-racist struggles than does France, which, doesn't recognize race as a category, does not have statistics about it. So it makes it that much harder to have conversations about, the extent of racial inequality, racial discrimination, et cetera. So I think the way I kind of come to the question that I realize is somewhat broad is, from a sociologist, is thinking about how different societies legitimate or don't legitimate even that term or even that category. So even allow you to have a conversation in academia or elsewhere in society about these topics. And I think, I think, with the exception of the UK, it's very difficult to have those conversations. Too quickly to the point of the question of decolonization, I think it is actually also kind of maybe gets to the first question as well. I think it's a couple of things I want to emphasize. when I think, the decolonization of curricula, I think is a really important move, but we should also be attentive to, I think Tuck's article of decolonization is not a metaphor. And so there's a sort of way that the term has taken on purchase in various ways. And I think it's helpful, but also we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that people actually, there's a literal connotation of the term in the sense that people actually want their land back, right? And that has to be part of what we're talking about as well. But in terms of specifically the work that we do within academia, I think a lot about centering particular voices that are not been historically centered or emphasized in my courses as a way to think through decolonizing curricula, like whose expertise, whose knowledge, whose set of knowledges is seen as valuable versus others, and maybe thinking through it that way. So I can say more about that, but I know we're getting close to time. So
Yeah, I think, maybe it's good to ask, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce Alok's name, Alok, or his, ask his question. I'm not sure if he's still here, but, I think that, he basically says he's a physicist, and in science, we are taught that science is international in character. However, in practice, the contributions from the non-Western world are non-existent in science textbooks. So unless that changes, racism will be difficult to erase. So his question is, do you think that academia truthfully shares the correct picture of cultural and racial contributions?
I can briefly answer before Dr. Simo answers. Yeah, I would say this also relates to the question of decolonization of our curricula, because I agree. I don't think that academia truthfully shares the correct picture of different contributions. I think it emphasizes a particular notion of, Western science and Western knowledges as being superior to any other knowledges. And I think that's deeply problematic, both in terms of sort of, the locus of expertise and scientific knowledge, but also in terms of what that conveys to, minoritized individuals in our institutions of higher education. So I do think there's a lot of, and there, as a sociologist, I think there's a lot of research on representations in textbooks and in terms of what they convey about, what identities, what cultural practices are seen as normative and which ones are not. And so I think this is a perfect example of that.
Dr. Simo, do you have a comment?
Yeah. What I would like to say is that, of course, our world is the product of imperialism, of racism, and of colonialism. It is the result of this world we are living in. And if I say, it's very interesting for Americans to see that abroad, they are maybe no longer Black, but American, that they may have another identity. It's also trying to say that, in fact, the world is constructed in the mind of people in such a way that some people give themselves this central place, assume it, and not even think of it, because if you see objectively, you will see from where knowledge is produced, and it has been quantified, and it's clear that more as half of the knowledge produced in almost all domains. That means also of the publications, come from certain places, very clear places, which has inherited it from a history where they have of domination, where they could marginalize and other people and make their production not even visible, or make their voices not audible, because that's the whole question. You can say if we work just with colleagues, they might realize that you produce knowledge that is as valuable as their own one, but it's not all to say that. Since even if you produce knowledge, you can disseminate it easily. You can bring it at a level where many people will get it, just through publication, in certain journals and so on. Surely, people will unconsciously think that you are coming from a world which is not productive, and they will assimilate you with that part of the world which is considered not to be very productive, and the attention they will pay to what you say or to what you write will not be exactly the same. That's the whole problem, with this world, which is constructed on a certain basis. And a part of that, what I say is that there are, let's say, ideas which has been disseminated things centuries. These people constructed themselves, constructed the rest of the world, and organized a clear discrimination in that. And most of the time it's described in the mind, and people are not aware of it. There's a movement now in Germany called German postcolonial. And many, I can tell you, colleagues are really surprised that might be even an issue. Talking of German postcolonial, because most of them, they will say, we don't have so much with colonization, so that we can think of the world from another perspective, not as a colonizing country, or is as a dominating country. They will tell you, it's good we lost the war, the Second World War, and so we are not so powerful in the world anymore. So we haven't got in our mind some presumptions and so on. So we can see, we can approach the world from a very clear, clean view. But it's possible to show that the categories they use, in fact, categories they have inherited, because that's it. If I speak of traditions, that means there's an heritage which is inscribed in books and so on. And some attitudes are not so obvious, very clearly stressed, and where you have to walk it out to show them. And this, I can tell you, many colleagues have realized that the success of German postcolonial has confronted them with images, with knowledge they thought were obvious, were serious, and which are now seen as questionable. This is the whole thing with the functioning of the world Öffentlichkeit, because there's something which is, I don't know how you call it in English, Öffentlichkeit. It means that there are places where ideas are disseminated, distributed, inscribed, and which people take with them without thinking of it at all. And if you get there, you find only books produced by. You don't find any books produced by other people. At the end, you will be yourself convinced that it's because, in fact, it's only some people who can produce knowledge.
Right.
That's
Dr.
what we have to work on, in order to make it clear that this produce the product of history, which has brought us, in fact, to divide the world, to make hierarchy between people, between areas, and so on and so on.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's see. Maybe we won't have time. We'll let Tom ask his final question and ask you to do it very, very briefly. And then I'll just say goodbye now and say thank you so much. We appreciate, what you've contributed to this conversation. So Tom, please go ahead.
Thank you. Mine is not a question, it's actually a comment to Dr. Simo. He speaking in his third language, in my first language, I learned a lot from him today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Very kind of you.
Thank you. Okay. Where?
Okay.
I don't have any opportunity to speak my first language, my native language, never. Because that's one of our problems we have, the field. There are languages which dominate the field of science, and English is one of those.
Okay. Well, Jean, then we have like a couple minutes. Do you have any closing comments that you want to say very quickly?
No, I just want to thank everyone for their participation in this dialogue. And I put my email address in the chat. If anyone has any further questions, I'm happy to be in touch. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been really illuminating, and I've really appreciated the chance to hear from both of you today. And thank you everybody for asking, for attending and asking great questions. I hopefully you'll join us for our next digital dialogue. We'll continue the conversation, just from a slightly different lens. And so we look forward to welcoming you back for that.